The dawn painted the sky in hues of amber and crimson as Jessie Winters stirred beneath her blanket, the crisp Montana air nipping at her exposed cheek. The caravan had vanished, leaving nothing but trampled grass and cold ashes where a campfire had blazed the night before. Her eyes fluttered open to the vast emptiness of the prairie stretching endlessly around her, the distant silhouette of the Rocky Mountains her only companion, until she noticed the lone figure sitting several paces away, watching over her with patient vigilance. It was 1878, and the untamed wilderness of Montana Territory held little mercy for those abandoned to its whims. Jessie had joined the wagon train 3 weeks ago in Billings, desperate to reach the mining settlement of McGill where her late father's brother had promised her work in his general store. At 22, with no family left after the influenza took her parents, she had sold everything to purchase passage west. Now she found herself alone, not entirely alone. The cowboy rose to his feet, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the early morning light. His weathered hat tipped back slightly as he approached, revealing a face tanned by years under the western sun. "Mornin', Miss Winters," he said, voice low and gentle. "I'm afraid the others have gone on ahead, packed up before dawn and left." Jessie bolted upright, clutching the blanket to her chest. "Left, without me?" Her voice cracked as the reality sank in. But why would they? The man crouched beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "Name's Owen Tanner. I've been riding alongside your caravan for the past week. The wagon master declared you were slowing them down after your fever set in. Said McGill was still 3 days out and they couldn't afford to wait." Jessie's hand flew to her forehead. The events of the previous evening came back in fragments: the chills, the burning sensation, the wagon master's irritated expression as he forced bitter-tasting willow bark tea down her throat. "They just abandoned me." Her eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them away furiously, refusing to show weakness. Owen nodded grimly. "I argued against it. Told them it wasn't right to leave a young woman alone out here. That's when they suggested I stay behind if I was so concerned." His mouth twitched with a hint of amusement. "So I did." He extended a metal cup filled with steaming coffee toward her. "Thought you might need this. You've been sleeping soundly for nearly 12 hours. Your fever broke sometime in the night." Jessie accepted the cup cautiously, noting the calluses on his hands and the earnest blue eyes watching her. "You stayed with me all night, a perfect stranger." "My ma taught me better than to abandon folks in need," Owen replied simply. He gestured toward his horse grazing nearby and the small camp he had established. "I've got provisions enough to get us to McGill if you're willing to ride double, or I can escort you back to Billings, though that's a longer journey." Jessie sipped the coffee, its warmth spreading through her body. She studied Owen Tanner more carefully. He was older than her, perhaps 30, with a quiet confidence that came from years navigating the frontier. His clothes were worn but clean, his gun belt fastened securely but without the flashy ornaments favored by troublemakers. Most telling was the fact that he had maintained a respectful distance, making no move to take advantage of her vulnerability. "I need to reach McGill," she said firmly. "My uncle is expecting me. It's all I have left." Owen nodded, rising to his feet. "Then McGill it is. Can you ride?" "I grew up on a farm in Missouri," Jessie replied with a touch of pride. "I've been riding since before I could walk." This earned her the first genuine smile from the cowboy. "Good, we'll set out within the hour. Best take advantage of the daylight." As Jessie finished her coffee, she noticed Owen had hung her dress on a nearby bush, the garment nearly dry from what must have been a washing. "You had quite the fever," he explained, seeing her questioning look. "It soaked through your clothes. I didn't touch anything I shouldn't have. Just dampened your forehead with a cloth and made sure you stayed covered. Washed your dress at first light." A blush crept up Jessie's cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Tanner, not just for that, but for staying. Most men would have gone on with the caravan." "Most men haven't seen what I've seen," he replied cryptically, turning to pack his meager belongings. While Owen prepared his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion he called Rusty Jessie changed behind a cluster of bushes, her mind racing with questions about this silent protector who had appeared in her darkest hour. The dress felt cool and clean against her skin, a small comfort in the vastness of her current predicament. Within the hour, they were mounted, Jessie sitting behind Owen, her arms wrapped hesitantly around his waist. She felt the solid strength of him as Rusty began to trot across the prairie, following the trail left by the wagon train. "They've got about 5 hours head start," Owen said over his shoulder. "We won't catch them before they reach McGill, but we'll arrive no more than a day behind them." "Good," Jessie replied, her voice hard with determination. "I intend to have words with that wagon master when I see him," Owen chuckled. "I don't doubt it, Miss Winters." They rode in companionable silence for a time, the rhythm of the horse's gait lulling Jessie into a strange peace despite her circumstances. The Montana landscape rolled out before them, a sea of golden grass rippling in the breeze, dotted with wildflowers and the occasional scrubby tree. It was beautiful in its wildness, a stark contrast to the crowded streets of St. Louis, where she had spent the last few years working as a seamstress after her family's farm failed. "May I ask what brings you to these parts, Mr. Tanner?" Jessie finally ventured, curiosity getting the better of her. Owen was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. "I've been moving cattle up from Wyoming," he finally said. "Sold the herd in Billings. Was heading to McGill myself when I fell in with your caravan." "You have business in McGill?" "Of a sort." His tone suggested he wasn't inclined to elaborate further. By midday, they stopped to rest beside a small creek. Owen helped Jessie down from the horse, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach, which she attributed to her still recovering condition. Owen shared jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags, along with fresh water from the creek. As they ate, Jessie noticed his gaze repeatedly scanning the horizon, vigilant even in this peaceful moment. "Are you expecting trouble?" she asked. He shook his head slightly. "Just a habit. The territory might be settling, but it's still wild country. Better to spot trouble before it spots you." "You speak from experience." A shadow passed across his features. "I was a scout for the army for a time. After that, I rode with a cattle outfit. You learn to keep your eyes open or you don't last long." Jessie studied him with new interest. "Is that how you got that?" She nodded toward a thin scar that ran along his jawline. Owen's fingers touched the mark absently. "Sioux Brave, winter of '71. I was young and foolish, separated from my unit." His eyes met hers briefly. "He had every right to kill me, but he let me live, taught me something about mercy." The admission hung between them, revealing more about Owen Tanner than perhaps he had intended. Jessie sensed there were deeper stories there, but she didn't press. They continued their journey through the afternoon, the sun beating down mercilessly. Jessie found herself leaning more heavily against Owen's back, fatigue from her illness still lingering in her bones. He seemed to sense her weariness without her having to voice it, slowing their pace and stopping more frequently for rest. As twilight approached, Owen guided Rusty toward a small copse of trees near another creek, a veritable oasis in the open grassland. "We'll stop here for the night," he announced, dismounting and turning to help Jessie down. "There's good water, shelter, and enough wood for a fire." Jessie's legs nearly buckled as her feet touched the ground, and Owen's arm quickly circled her waist to steady her. "Still weak from the fever," he observed, concern etching his features. "Let's get you settled." He efficiently set up camp, unrolling his bedroll for Jessie and fashioning a simple lean-to of branches and his oilskin coat for shelter. He built a small fire, its warm glow creating a circle of light against the encroaching darkness. From his saddlebags, he produced coffee, beans, and a small portion of salted bacon, a feast compared to the meager rations they had eaten during the day. As the aroma of coffee and cooking bacon filled the air, Jessie watched Owen move about the camp with practiced ease. There was something comforting about his quiet competence, the way he anticipated needs before they arose. "You've done this before," she observed. "Taking care of people." Owen paused in his work, a fleeting expression of sadness crossing his face. "Had a younger sister once, Mary. She was sickly most of her life. I looked after her when Pa was working." The past tense told Jessie everything she needed to know. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Owen nodded his acknowledgement, returning to his cooking. When the meal was ready, he served Jessie first, making sure she ate before taking his own portion. The hot food revitalized her, bringing color back to her cheeks. As they sat by the fire, the vast canopy of stars spreading above them, Jessie felt a strange sense of peace despite the precariousness of her situation. Here she was, miles from civilization with a man she barely knew, yet she felt safer than she had in the crowded wagon train. "Tell me about your uncle in McGill," Owen said, breaking the companionable silence. "Uncle James. He's my father's brother, went west during the gold rush years ago, found enough success to open a general store instead of continuing to mine." Jessie stared into the fire. "We haven't seen each other since I was a child, but he wrote after my parents died, offering me a position in his store and a place to live. Generous of him." "I hope so," Jessie admitted. "The truth is, I don't know what kind of man he's become out here. My father always said the West changes people sometimes for better, sometimes not." Owen studied her across the flames. "What will you do if things aren't as you hope with your uncle?" It was a question Jessie had avoided asking herself during the long journey west. "I don't know," she confessed. "I have some savings, enough to perhaps start over somewhere else if needed. I'm a skilled seamstress. There's always work for that. McGill's growing," Owen offered. "Might be opportunity there regardless." The conversation lulled, and Jessie found herself fighting to keep her eyes open, exhaustion finally claiming her. Owen noticed immediately. "You should rest," he said gently. "I'll keep watch." Jessie wanted to protest that he needed sleep too, but her body betrayed her as a yawn escaped. "Wake me for my turn at watch," she murmured, knowing even as she said it that he wouldn't. Owen's smile confirmed her suspicion. "Sleep well, Miss Winters." As she settled onto the bedroll, pulling the blanket around her, Jessie watched Owen through half-closed eyes. He sat with his back against a tree, rifle across his lap, gaze fixed on the darkness beyond their small circle of firelight. "Thank you," she whispered, not sure if he could hear. "For staying with me." If Owen replied, Jessie didn't hear it, sleep already claiming her. Morning came with the melodious calls of meadowlarks and the gentle rustling of leaves. Jessie awoke to find the fire rebuilt and coffee already brewing. Owen sat nearby, whittling a small piece of wood with a pocket knife, his features softer in the golden morning light. "You didn't wake me," she accused gently, sitting up and running a hand through her tangled hair. Owen shrugged. "You needed the rest more than I needed the sleep. How are you feeling?" Jessie took a moment to assess her body. The lingering weakness from the fever had mostly receded, leaving only a slight fatigue in its wake. "Better, much better." "Good, we've got another long day ahead of us." He handed her a cup of coffee and a piece of hardtack softened in the hot liquid. "It's not much of a breakfast, but it'll keep you going until midday." As they ate, Jessie studied the piece he had been whittling. It was taking the shape of a small horse, the details surprisingly delicate given the size of Owen's hands and the simplicity of his tools. "That's beautiful," she commented. "Did you learn that during those long nights as a scout?" "My grandfather taught me," Owen replied, tucking the unfinished carving into his pocket. "He always said idle hands were the devil's workshop." They broke camp efficiently, Jessie insisting on helping despite Owen's protestations. Within half an hour they were mounted and continuing their journey, the rising sun at their backs. The day proved warmer than the previous one, the summer heat building as they rode. Owen set a steady pace, mindful of both Rusty's endurance and Jessie's recovering strength. They talked intermittently, sharing stories of their respective childhoods. Jessie's on the Missouri farm, Owen's on a small ranch in Colorado. Jessie learned that Owen had lost both parents in a flash flood when he was 17, leaving him to make his own way in the world. He had tried his hand at various occupations: cowhand, scout, even a brief stint as a deputy in a small Wyoming town before returning to what he knew best: cattle. "The army taught me to track and to survive," he explained. "But it wasn't a life I wanted to continue. Too much death, too little purpose that I could believe in." "And cattle driving has purpose?" Jessie asked, genuinely curious. Owen considered this. "It's honest work. The cattle feed people. The money I earn is clean, and I answer to myself, mostly." They stopped at midday beside another creek, taking advantage of the shade offered by a cluster of cottonwoods. While Rusty drank and grazed, Owen produced dried apples and more jerky from his saddlebags. "A feast," Jessie commented with a smile, accepting her portion gratefully. As they ate, Owen pointed toward the horizon. "See those hills? McGill lies just beyond them. We should reach it by tomorrow noon if we maintain our pace." Jessie's heart quickened at the news. McGill, the destination that had consumed her thoughts for months, was finally within reach. Yet she found herself experiencing an unexpected reluctance at the prospect of ending this journey with Owen. "What will you do in McGill?" she asked, realizing she still didn't know his business there. A shadow crossed his face. "I have some matters to settle, nothing that need concern you." His sudden reticence piqued Jessie's curiosity, but she recognized the closing of a door when she saw it. Whatever brought Owen Tanner to McGill was clearly not something he wished to discuss. They resumed their journey, the afternoon stretching endlessly before them. The terrain gradually changed, becoming more varied with rolling hills and occasional rocky outcroppings. In the distance, Jessie could make out the purple silhouettes of mountains, their majesty humbling even from afar. As the sun began its descent, Owen guided Rusty toward a promising campsite near a small tree-lined pond. They had just dismounted when Owen suddenly stiffened, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "What is it?" Jessie whispered, instantly alert. "Someone's been here," Owen murmured, his eyes scanning the area. "Recently." He moved cautiously toward the pond, examining the ground with practiced ease. Jessie watched as he crouched, studying something invisible to her untrained eye. "3 men," he reported. "Probably left this morning. Heading the same direction we are." "The wagon train," Owen shook his head. "Different trail, and they were riding hard." He straightened, his expression troubled. "Let's move on a bit further. I don't like the feel of this place." They rode another hour before finding a suitable alternative, a small hollow protected by a rocky overhang. Owen insisted on a smaller fire than the previous night, and Jessie noted that he kept his rifle closer at hand. "You think those men are dangerous?" she asked as they ate their simple supper. "I think it's wise to be cautious," Owen replied, his eyes constantly moving, scanning their surroundings. "The territory is safer than it was, but there are still those who operate outside the law: cattle rustlers, horse thieves, deserters. Men with nothing to lose." The thought sent a chill through Jessie despite the relative warmth of the evening. She had heard stories. Of course, everyone traveling west had, but the reality of potential danger seemed more immediate now. "I'm glad you stayed with me," she admitted quietly. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't." Owen's gaze met hers across the small fire. "You're stronger than you think, Miss Winters. You would have found a way." His confidence in her, a woman he barely knew, touched something deep within Jessie. So many in her life had underestimated her: the farm hands who thought a girl couldn't manage the accounts, the men in St. Louis who saw only a potential wife or worse. Owen Tanner seemed to see her true measure without her having to prove it. That night, as they prepared to sleep, Owen positioned himself closer to her than before, his rifle within easy reach. Despite his earlier reassurances, his vigilance communicated more than words how seriously he took the potential threat. "I'll wake you if there's trouble," he promised, as Jessie settled onto the bedroll he had again insisted she use. "But I expect we'll have a quiet night." Jessie nodded, pulling the blanket up to her chin. The stars overhead seemed impossibly bright, the vastness of the sky both terrifying and exhilarating. "Mr. Tanner," she said softly, "would you tell me something about the stars? I imagine you've spent many nights beneath them." Owen leaned back against his saddle, his face lifting to the heavens. "My grandfather knew all their stories, the Indian names and the white man's names both." He pointed upward, tracing a pattern. "See there, the white man calls that the Big Dipper, but the Cheyenne call it the Seven Brothers." For the next half hour, Owen shared what he remembered of his grandfather's teaching stories of bears and hunters, heroes and maidens, all written in the stars. His voice, low and melodic in the darkness, wove a spell of comfort around Jessie. She felt her eyelids growing heavy, sleep beckoning despite the hard ground beneath her. The last thing she remembered was Owen's voice, gentle and reassuring, telling of a warrior who became a star to guide lost travelers home. Jessie dreamed of stars falling like rain, and a hand reaching out to catch her as she tumbled from the edge of the world. She awoke to the sound of voices, male voices, unfamiliar and too close. Her eyes flew open to see Owen standing protectively between her and three mounted men, his rifle held casually but purposefully across his body. "Like I said, gentlemen, just my wife and I making our way to McGill," Owen was saying, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "Don't mean any trouble." One of the men, a wiry individual with a pockmarked face, leaned forward in his saddle. "Pretty young wife you got there, mister. Bit fancy for a saddle tramp like yourself, ain't she?" Jessie sat up slowly, careful to keep the blanket around her. She had fallen asleep, fully clothed, thankfully, but she didn't want to draw any more attention than necessary. "My personal affairs aren't your concern," Owen replied evenly. "We've got nothing of value except the horse, and I'd die before parting with him. So unless you're aiming to test that, I suggest you ride on." The leader of the group, a heavy-set man with a beard streaked with gray, raised a placating hand. "Easy now. We're just passing friendly-like, saw your fire and thought to check who was camping in these parts." His eyes, however, belied his words, calculating and cold as they assessed Owen's stance and Jessie's form. "Well, now you know," Owen said. "Safe travels to you." For a tense moment, Jessie thought the men might push the issue. She could see their hungry gazes lingering on Rusty, a fine horse worth more than most cowpunchers could afford. But something in Owen's demeanor, the steady way he held his rifle, perhaps, or the unflinching calm in his eyes seemed to give them pause. "McGill, you say?" the leader finally asked. "Might be we're headed that way ourselves, mining towns getting prosperous these days." "So I've heard," Owen replied non-committally. The bearded man nodded slowly. "Well then, maybe we'll see you there." He tugged his reins, turning his horse. "Come on, boys, daylight's wasting." The trio rode off, but Jessie noticed they headed east, not west toward McGill. Owen watched them until they disappeared over a rise, his posture remaining tense long after they had gone from sight. "Your wife?" Jessie asked when she was certain they were alone. Owen turned to her, a slight flush coloring his weathered cheeks. "Seemed safer than admitting I was escorting an unmarried woman. Men like that, they make assumptions." Jessie nodded her understanding, a flutter of something unnamed stirring in her chest at his protective instinct. "Who were they?" "Trouble," Owen said simply, finally lowering his rifle. "Let's break camp quickly. I want to put as much distance between us and them as possible." They ate a hasty breakfast and packed in record time. As Owen helped Jessie onto Rusty's back, his hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, his blue eyes searching hers. "I'm sorry about that," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to presume or put you in an uncomfortable position." Jessie surprised herself by covering one of his hands with her own. "You were protecting me. There's nothing to apologize for." Something passed between them in that moment, a connection deeper than the circumstances of their meeting would suggest. Jessie felt it like a physical thing, a tether binding her to this quiet, honorable man who had stayed by her side when others abandoned her. Owen nodded once, breaking the spell, and mounted behind her. They rode hard through the morning, Owen frequently checking their back trail, though there was no sign of pursuit. The landscape continued to change as they approached McGill, becoming more rugged with outcroppings of rock and deeper ravines cutting through the rolling terrain. By midday, they crested a rise and beheld their first view of McGill. The mining town sprawled across a valley, wooden buildings clustered around what appeared to be the main street, with smaller structures scattered up the hillsides. A creek ran through the center of town, and beyond it, Jessie could see the telltale signs of mining operations: sluice boxes, water wheels, and the open mouths of several shaft mines dug into the mountainside. "There it is," Owen said, pulling Rusty to a halt so they could take in the vista. McGill, Montana territory. Jessie felt a surge of emotions: relief at having finally reached their destination, apprehension about what awaited her, and an unexpected sadness at the thought that her time with Owen would soon come to an end. "It's bigger than I expected," she remarked, noting the church steeple and what appeared to be a two-story hotel dominating the main street. "It's grown considerably in the past few years," Owen agreed. "The original silver strike played out, but they found more veins deeper in. And it's become something of a trading hub for the region." They descended into the valley, the sounds and smells of the settlement becoming more distinct as they approached the ringing of a blacksmith's hammer, the barking of dogs, the mingled scents of wood smoke, livestock, and humanity. As they rode down the main street, Jessie was acutely aware of the stares they attracted. A woman riding double with a cowboy was noteworthy enough, but her dress, though clean thanks to Owen's care, showed the effects of hard travel. "You know where your uncle's store is located?" Owen asked as they navigated past a loaded freight wagon. Jessie scanned the storefronts. His last letter mentioned it was near the assayer's office. They continued down the street until they spotted a sign reading Winters General Mercantile. The two-story building looked prosperous, its fresh paint and large display windows suggesting a thriving business. Owen pulled Rusty to a stop before the hitching post and dismounted, turning to help Jessie down. As her feet touched the ground, she felt a momentary dizziness, whether from the long ride or the sudden realization that her journey was over. She couldn't say. Owen steadied her with a gentle hand on her elbow. "Are you all right?" Jessie nodded, straightening her dress and attempting to smooth her travel-tangled hair. "Just a bit overwhelmed," she admitted. "It's been a long journey." Owen's eyes softened with understanding. "That it has." They stood there for a moment, neither seeming eager to part. Jessie searched for the right words to express her gratitude, to acknowledge the unique bond that had formed between them over their brief time together. "Mr. Tanner Owen," she began, using his given name for the first time. "I don't know how to thank you properly for what you've done." "No thanks needed," he replied, his voice gruff with emotion. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Jessie said firmly. "They wouldn't have. The others left me behind without a second thought. You stayed. That makes all the difference in the world." The door to the mercantile opened, and a stocky man in his 50s emerged, his curious gaze moving between Jessie and Owen. His features, similar enough to Jessie's father's to be recognizable, registered first confusion, then dawning recognition. Jessie Winters." He called, stepping forward. "Good Lord, girl, is that you?" Jessie turned toward the voice, a tentative smile forming. "Uncle James." The man hurried down the steps, his face breaking into a wide grin. "We'd about given up on you. The wagon train arrived yesterday afternoon, and when you weren't with them." He enveloped her in a bear hug, then held her at arm's length to examine her. "They said you'd fallen ill, that they had to leave you behind. We were organizing a search party for this afternoon." Jessie stiffened at his words, anger flaring anew at the memory of her abandonment. "They didn't have to leave me," she said tightly. "They chose to. If not for Mr. Tanner here, I might still be out there." James Winters turned his attention to Owen, taking in the cowboy's weathered appearance with newfound appreciation. "You stayed with her, brought her safely to McGill?" Owen shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny. "It was the right thing to do, sir." "Well, sir, you have my eternal gratitude," James declared, pumping Owen's hand vigorously. "Please come inside, both of you. You must be exhausted and hungry." Owen hesitated, glancing back at Rusty. "I should see to my horse first, find the livery." "Nonsense, my clerk can take him over." "Joseph," James called toward the store. A gangly youth appeared in the doorway. "Take this gentleman's horse to Ferguson's livery. Tell him to give the animal the best care, feed, grooming, everything. Put it on my account." Despite Owen's protests, the clerk led Rusty away, and James ushered them both into the mercantile. The interior was spacious and well-stocked, shelves lined with everything from tools and hardware to bolts of fabric and preserved foods. A small pot-bellied stove in the corner provided warmth, and beside it, a pot of coffee simmered. "Martha," James called toward a doorway at the back. "Martha, come quick. Jessie's here and she's brought a friend." A woman emerged from the back room, plump, pleasant-faced, with graying hair pulled into a neat bun. Her eyes widened at the sight of Jessie, and she rushed forward with outstretched arms. "Oh, my dear girl, we were so worried when that awful wagon master told us they'd left you behind." She embraced Jessie warmly, then pulled back to examine her with motherly concern. "You're so thin and pale. James, can't you see she's about to drop from exhaustion?" Before Jessie could protest, Martha had guided her to a chair by the stove and pressed a mug of hot coffee into her hands. "Drink this, dear. I've got stew simmering in the back and fresh bread just out of the oven." James had steered Owen to another chair, treating him with the deference reserved for honored guests. "Mr. Tanner, I cannot express enough how grateful we are. When that wagon master Jackson, I believe his name, was told us they'd left Jessie because of a fever, I nearly throttled him on the spot." "Jackson," Owen repeated, a hard edge to his voice. "Yes, that was his name." Martha bustled back with bowls of fragrant beef stew and thick slices of bread slathered with butter. As they ate, Jessie recounted their journey, her voice breaking slightly when she described waking to find the caravan gone and Owen watching over her. "The fever had broken by morning," she explained. "They could have waited just a few more hours." "Contemptible," James muttered. "Rest assured, I've already spread the word about Jackson's actions. He'll find no further employment in this territory if I have anything to say about it." Throughout the meal, Jessie couldn't help but notice Owen's increasing discomfort. He answered James's questions politely but briefly, his gaze frequently drifting to the door as if contemplating escape. When Martha insisted on showing Jessie to her room upstairs, the family lived above the store, Jessie cast a concerned glance at Owen. He gave her a reassuring nod, but she could sense his withdrawal. The room Martha led her to was small but charming, with a real bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. Fresh linens and a vase of wildflowers welcomed her, touching Jessie deeply. "Your uncle had this room prepared for weeks," Martha explained, helping Jessie remove her travel-stained dress. "He was so excited when your letter came saying you'd accepted his offer." "Martha," Jessie said hesitantly, "are you my uncle's wife?" Martha smiled warmly. "Going on 15 years now, your uncle never mentioned me in his letters." Jessie shook her head, embarrassed. "His correspondence was infrequent and brief," Martha chuckled. "That sounds like James, never was one for putting pen to paper." She poured warm water into the basin. "Wash up, dear. I'll bring you one of my dresses to wear until we can get you properly outfitted. You're slighter than I am, but we can make do with pins until your trunks arrive with the next freight wagon." "My trunks?" "Yes, the wagon master said they had to leave your personal belongings with the rest of the caravan when they moved on without you." Martha's expression darkened momentarily. Despicable man. While Jessie washed, Martha chattered about McGill, the church socials and community dances, the new schoolhouse being built, and the growing number of respectable families settling in what had once been primarily a rough mining camp. "And your young man," Martha ventured, watching Jessie's reaction carefully. Will he be staying in McGill? Jessie nearly dropped the washcloth. Mr. Tanner is not my young man, she protested, a blush heating her cheeks. He's simply a kind stranger who helped me when I needed it most. Martha's knowing smile suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. He's quite handsome, and the way he looks at you. Martha, please, Jessie interrupted, her heart beating faster at the older woman's implication. We barely know each other. If you say so, dear. Martha patted Jessie's hand. Now, let's get you into this dress. Your uncle is probably talking that poor man's ear off downstairs. When Jessie returned to the main floor of the mercantile, freshly washed and wearing a borrowed dress that hung somewhat loosely on her frame, she found Owen and her uncle deep in conversation by the counter. Owen had also taken the opportunity to wash up, his face cleaner and his hair dampened and combed back. He looked up as she descended the stairs, and something in his expression, a flash of admiration quickly masked, sent a flutter through Jessie's stomach. You look rested, he commented, rising from his seat. That's good. Thanks to you, she replied softly. Turning to her uncle, she asked, Have you been interrogating Mr. Tanner in my absence? James laughed heartily. Merely getting acquainted with the man who saved my niece. And it turns out Mr. Tanner here has quite a reputation in these parts. Owen shifted uncomfortably. Hardly that, sir. Nonsense. The man who tracked down the Sutton gang and brought them to justice single-handedly, that's no small feat. Jessie looked at Owen with surprise. You never mentioned that. It was some years back, Owen said dismissively, and I wasn't alone. The territorial marshal was involved. Only after you'd done the hard work of finding their hideout, James insisted. 3 men who'd robbed banks from Helena to Virginia City. Killed 2 guards in the process. Everyone was afraid to go after them until Owen Tanner took up the trail. Jessie studied Owen with new eyes, seeing layers to this quiet cowboy she hadn't glimpsed during their journey together. Is that what brings you to McGill? She asked. Are you tracking someone again? A shadow passed over Owen's features. Something like that, he admitted. But my business can wait. The important thing is that you're safely delivered to your family. James clapped him on the shoulder. And you must stay with us at least for a few days. We have a spare room and it's the least we can offer after what you've done for Jessie. Owen hesitated, clearly torn. That's very generous, but I wouldn't want to impose. It's not an imposition, James insisted. It's our pleasure. Besides, the hotel is full with a mining company delegation in town, and the boarding house isn't fit for a dog, let alone a hero. Jessie sensed Owen's discomfort with both the praise and the invitation, but she found herself hoping he would accept. The thought of him simply riding away, of never seeing him again, created an unexpected ache in her chest. Please, she said softly. At least for tonight, you must be as tired as I am. Something in her voice seemed to sway him, and Owen nodded reluctantly. One night then, thank you. That evening, they shared a proper meal around the Winters' dining table: roast chicken, potatoes, fresh vegetables from Martha's garden, and apple pie for dessert. It was the most satisfying meal Jessie had eaten in months, made all the more enjoyable by the company. James proved to be a natural storyteller, regaling them with tales of McGill's early days when he'd arrived with little more than the clothes on his back and a dream of striking it rich. Instead of silver, he'd found opportunity in supplying the miners, eventually building the most successful mercantile in the region. Throughout dinner, Jessie found her gaze repeatedly drawn to Owen. He participated in the conversation politely but sparingly, offering insights about the cattle business when asked, but otherwise content to listen. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled, how his hands, strong enough to control a half-ton horse with ease, handled his silverware with surprising delicacy. After the meal, Martha shooed them into the small parlor while she cleared the table, refusing all offers of help. James poured small glasses of brandy for himself and Owen, and the 3 settled into comfortable chairs before the fireplace. So, Mr. Tanner, James began, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Now that my niece is safely delivered, what are your plans? You mentioned business in McGill." Owen took a small sip of his brandy before answering. "I'm looking for someone, a man named Lawrence Blackwell." The name caused James to straighten in his chair. "Blackwell, the mining engineer?" Owen nodded. "You know him." "Everyone in McGill knows Blackwell. He's the superintendent at the Silver Crown mine, largest operation in these parts. Brought in by the Eastern investors about a year ago to modernize their methods." James studied Owen curiously. "May I ask why you're seeking him out?" Owen's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "We have unfinished business." The vague answer hung in the air, pregnant with implications. Jessie sensed there was much more to the story than Owen was willing to share. "I see," James said carefully. "Well, finding Blackwell won't be difficult. He lives in that big house on the hill overlooking town. Can't miss it, only two-story residence besides the hotel. Has a fancy wrought iron fence around it." Owen nodded his thanks, his gaze drifting to the flames dancing in the fireplace. The conversation turned to other topics: the unusually dry summer, the latest shipment of goods expected from Helena, Martha's plans to expand her vegetable garden, but Jessie could see that Owen's thoughts remained elsewhere. When Martha rejoined them, bringing coffee and suggesting it was time for their exhausted guests to retire, Jessie felt relief mixed with reluctance. She was indeed bone-weary, but she also felt a strange urgency to learn more about Owen's purpose in McGill before he disappeared from her life. As James showed Owen to the small guest room at the end of the hall, Jessie lingered in the doorway of her own room, catching Owen's eye as he passed. "Thank you again," she said softly, "for everything." Owen paused, the lamplight casting half his face in shadow. "Get some rest, Miss Winters. You're home now." The words sounded like a goodbye, and Jessie felt a pang of loss even before he turned away. She watched him follow her uncle down the hall, his broad shoulders set with determination for whatever confrontation awaited him tomorrow. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Jessie lay in the unfamiliar bed, her mind replaying every moment of her brief time with Owen Tanner. Why should she care so much about a man she had known for mere days? Why did the thought of him riding out of her life create such a hollow feeling in her chest? The answer, when it came to her in the dark stillness of the room, was both simple and terrifying. In the span of 3 days, Owen Tanner had shown her more genuine care, more respect, and more understanding than any man she had ever known. He had seen her at her most vulnerable and treated her with unfailing honor. He had stayed when others left, protected when others abandoned. Jessie Winters was falling in love with a man who had every intention of completing his mysterious business in McGill, and then vanishing back into the vastness of the frontier. The realization kept her awake long into the night, her heart and mind at war over what, if anything, she could or should do about it. Morning arrived with the cheerful sounds of McGill coming to life, wagons rumbling down the main street, merchants opening their shops, miners heading to their shifts. Jessie dressed quickly in another of Martha's altered dresses, eager to see if Owen was still at breakfast or if he had already departed on his mission. She found the family gathered around the table, Martha serving generous portions of flapjacks, eggs, and bacon. To her relief, Owen was there, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt that James must have loaned him. It strained slightly across his broader shoulders. "Good morning," she greeted, trying to keep her voice casual despite the flutter in her stomach at the sight of him. "I hope you slept well." Owen rose politely as she entered, a gesture that seemed at odds with his rugged exterior but somehow suited him perfectly. "Very well, thank you. Your aunt and uncle have been most hospitable." James waved away the formality. "Least we could do. Sit, both of you." Martha's outdone herself this morning. As they ate, James outlined his plans to show Jessie the workings of the store that day. "You'll start easy, just observing and learning where everything is kept. In a week or so, once you're settled, you can begin taking more responsibility." Jessie nodded, grateful for her uncle's consideration but acutely aware of Owen's silence. He ate methodically, his mind clearly elsewhere. When he finally spoke, it was to address James directly. "Mr. Winters, I wonder if you might direct me to the local law enforcement. Before I approach Blackwell, I'd like to pay my respects to the sheriff or marshal." "Of course," James replied. "Sheriff Donovan's office is just down the street past the bank." "Good man, Donovan, firm but fair. Been keeping the peace in McGill for going on 5 years now." Owen nodded his thanks, finishing his coffee and rising from the table. "Then, with your permission, I'll be on my way. I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." "Nonsense," Martha protested. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need." Owen smiled politely but firmly. "You're very kind, madam, but I have matters to attend to." He turned to Jessie, his expression softening slightly. "Miss Winters, I wish you all the best in your new home. I have no doubt you'll thrive here." The formality of his goodbye stung, but Jessie matched it with composure she didn't feel. "Thank you, Mr. Tanner. I hope your business in McGill concludes satisfactorily." Something flickered in his eyes, regret perhaps, or a deeper emotion he couldn't express. Then he turned to James, extending his hand. "Thank you for your kindness, sir, and yours, Mrs. Winters." James shook his hand firmly. "The door is always open to you, Tanner, remember that." Martha surprised Owen with a quick, motherly hug. "Be careful with whatever business brings you here," she whispered, not quite softly enough that Jessie couldn't hear, "and don't be a stranger." With a final nod to the assembled family, Owen collected his hat and departed down the back stairs that led from the living quarters to the alley behind the mercantile. The moment the door closed behind him, Jessie felt his absence like a physical pain. She pushed the feeling aside, focusing on helping Martha clear the breakfast dishes, but her aunt, perceptive as ever, noticed her distraction. "He's quite something, that Mr. Tanner," Martha commented casually as they worked. "Not many men would do what he did for you." Jessie tried to maintain her composure. "He's a good man," she agreed, keeping her voice neutral. "I was fortunate he was there." Martha studied her with knowing eyes. "And that's all, just gratitude." "Martha," Jessie protested, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "I barely know him." "Sometimes knowing someone's true character takes years," Martha replied sagely. "And sometimes it takes just a moment of crisis." She patted Jessie's hand. "I saw the way you looked at him, and the way he looked at you when he thought no one was watching." Before Jessie could respond, James called from the front of the store, announcing that the first customers of the day had arrived. Grateful for the interruption, Jessie quickly dried her hands and hurried to join her uncle, leaving Martha's knowing smile behind. The day passed in a blur of introductions and instructions, as James showed Jessie the workings of the mercantile. She met regular customers, miners, townspeople, ranchers from the surrounding countryside, all curious about the new young woman behind the counter. James proudly introduced her as his niece from Missouri, come to help run the family business. Despite her best efforts to focus on her new responsibilities, Jessie found her thoughts repeatedly straying to Owen. What was happening with his confrontation with Blackwell? Was he in danger? Would he simply ride out of McGill and her life once his business was concluded? By mid-afternoon, the store had quieted, and James suggested Jessie take a short break. "Go for a walk," he urged. "Get to know the town a bit. We can manage here for an hour." Grateful for the opportunity to clear her head, Jessie stepped out onto the boardwalk. McGill hummed with activity, freight wagons being loaded and unloaded, miners coming off shift, children playing in the dusty street while their mothers gossiped outside the millinery. Almost without conscious decision, Jessie found herself walking toward the sheriff's office. Perhaps Sheriff Donovan could tell her something about Owen's purpose in McGill. It wasn't proper, she knew, to pry into a man's private affairs, but concern for Owen's welfare overrode her sense of propriety. The sheriff's office was a small but solid building with barred windows and a worn wooden sign hanging above the door. Jessie hesitated on the threshold, suddenly uncertain of her purpose. What would she say? How would she explain her interest? Before she could decide, the door swung open and a tall, silver-haired man in a sheriff's badge stepped out, nearly colliding with her. "Beg pardon, miss," he said, tipping his hat. "Didn't see you standing there." "It's quite all right," Jessie replied. "I wondered if—" The sheriff regarded her with patient curiosity. "You're James Winters' niece, aren't you? Just arrived yesterday." Jessie nodded, surprised to be recognized. "Yes, sir, Jessie Winters. Thomas Donovan." He extended a weather-beaten hand. "News travels fast in a town this size. Heard about your troubles with the wagon train, disgraceful behavior on their part." "Yes, well, fortunately Mr. Tanner was kind enough to see me safely to McGill." At the mention of Owen's name, something shifted in the sheriff's expression. "Tanner, yes, just had a conversation with him as a matter of fact," Jessie's heart quickened. "Is he all right, I mean?" "I was concerned about his business here. It seemed complicated." Sheriff Donovan studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing how much to share. "Mr. Tanner's business is indeed complicated, Miss Winters, and potentially dangerous. But I've known Owen Tanner for many years, and if anyone can handle himself in a difficult situation, it's him." "Then you know why he's here. What he wants with Mr. Blackwell," the sheriff sighed, gesturing to a bench outside his office. "Perhaps you should sit down, Miss Winters. There are some things about Owen Tanner you might want to know." With growing apprehension, Jessie settled beside him on the bench. "I first met Owen about 8 years ago," Donovan began. "I was a deputy in Virginia City then. He came into town tracking a man who had murdered his sister." Jessie's hand flew to her mouth. "His sister? Mary," Donovan nodded grimly. "Mary Tanner. Beautiful girl by all accounts, sickly, as Owen probably told you. She'd come west with him after their parents died, hoping the mountain air might improve her condition. They settled on a small spread outside Cheyenne." "What happened to her?" Jessie asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. "Lawrence Blackwell happened to her," Donovan said, his voice hardening. "He was a gambling man back then, moving from town to town, living by his wits and his skill with cards. He courted Mary, convinced her to marry him. Owen was away driving cattle when it happened." Jessie felt a cold weight settling in her stomach. "Go on." "When Owen returned, he found Mary dead. Beaten so badly her own brother could barely recognize her. All their savings gone, along with Blackwell." Donovan's weathered face was grim with the memory. "Owen tracked him for almost a year before cornering him in Virginia City. Would have killed him too if I hadn't stepped in." "You saved Blackwell's life," Donovan nodded. "Convinced Owen that frontier justice wouldn't bring Mary back, that Blackwell deserved a proper trial, not a bullet between the eyes. Owen finally agreed, though I think it went against every instinct he had. So Blackwell was convicted." Jessie asked hopefully, the sheriff's expression darkened. "Should have been. Evidence was clear enough, but Blackwell had friends in high places, mining investors who saw potential in him. They hired fancy lawyers from Helena who twisted everything around. Made it sound like Mary had provoked her own death, that Blackwell acted in self-defense." "That's horrible," Jessie whispered, thinking of the gentle way Owen had spoken of his sister. "Jury acquitted him," Donovan continued. "Blackwell disappeared afterward and Owen changed. Became the man you met, quiet, solitary, driven. He tried to put it behind him, went back to driving cattle, took odd jobs as a scout, but I always knew he was waiting, watching for news of Blackwell. And now he's found him," Jessie concluded, her heart racing with fear for what Owen might do. "Here in McGill," Donovan nodded solemnly. "Blackwell's done well for himself, reinvented himself as a mining engineer, married the daughter of a wealthy investor, lives in that big house on the hill like he's royalty." His voice held undisguised contempt. "When Owen came to me this morning, I knew exactly why he was here. Is he going to kill him?" Jessie asked bluntly. "Is that why he came to McGill?" The sheriff sighed heavily. "I don't know, Miss Winters. He says he only wants justice, that he's collected evidence over the years that proves Blackwell's guilt beyond question. Wants me to arrest Blackwell, send him back to Wyoming territory to face new charges." But you're concerned it's more than that. A man doesn't track another man for 8 years just to see him stand trial, Donovan said grimly. Not when that man murdered his sister. Jessie stood abruptly, her mind racing. Where is he now? Owen, I mean, said he was going up to Blackwell's house. Wanted to face him man to man before involving the law. The sheriff's expression was grave. I advised against it, but Owen Tanner's not a man easily swayed once his mind is set. And you let him go. Jessie's voice rose with indignation, knowing what might happen. Donovan stood as well, his expression weary but resolute. I have no legal grounds to stop him, Miss Winters. Owen Tanner hasn't broken any laws in my jurisdiction, and for what it's worth, I believe he'll try to do this right. But if Blackwell provokes him. Jessie didn't wait to hear the rest. She was already moving, gathering her skirts and hurrying in the direction of the hill where the Blackwell house stood prominent against the skyline. Miss Winters, Donovan called after her. It's not wise to interfere in men's business, but Jessie was beyond heeding such warnings. All she could think about was Owen, the man who had stayed by her side when she was at her most vulnerable, who had protected her without expecting anything in return. She couldn't stand by while he risked everything for vengeance, no matter how justified. The climb up the hill was steep, the afternoon sun beating down mercilessly. Jessie's borrowed dress, too large and hastily altered, hampered her progress, but determination drove her forward. As she neared the imposing house with its wrought iron fence, she could see 2 figures on the wide front porch, one unmistakably Owen, his stance tense and ready, the other a well-dressed man whose arrogant posture suggested he was Blackwell. Drawing closer, she could hear their voices, raised in confrontation. You don't remember me, do you? Owen was saying, his voice controlled but vibrating with underlying emotion. It's been 8 years, but I thought a man might remember the brother of the woman he beat to death. Blackwell's response was dismissive. I don't know what you're talking about. You've clearly mistaken me for someone else. No mistake, Blackwell. I'm Owen Tanner. Mary was my sister. At this, Blackwell's demeanor changed subtly. A flicker of recognition and fear crossed his features before he masked it with indignation. That business was settled years ago. I was acquitted by a jury of my peers. You have no right to come here making accusations. Owen took a step closer, his hand hovering near his holstered revolver. A jury manipulated by your wealthy friends, but I've spent 8 years gathering evidence, Blackwell, witnesses who saw what you did to her, your pattern of abuse, the money you stole. Evidence, Blackwell laughed harshly. There is no evidence because there was no crime. Your sister was unbalanced. She attacked me. What happened afterward was unfortunate but not my fault. Owen's hand moved to his gun and Jessie's heart nearly stopped. Say her name, Owen demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. Say Mary's name. Blackwell's eyes darted to Owen's hand, then back to his face. This is absurd. I'll call for the sheriff if you don't leave my property immediately. The sheriff knows I'm here, Owen replied coldly. Knows why too. You've built yourself a fine life on my sister's blood, Blackwell. New name, new profession, new wife who probably has no idea what kind of monster she married. At the mention of his wife, Blackwell's composure cracked. Leave my family out of this. Whatever grievance you think you have with me, it's in the past. I'm a respected member of this community now. A respected member who beats his wife like he beat Mary. Owen's question struck like a lash. Blackwell blanched. That's not Lawrence. A woman's voice came from inside the house. Who's at the door? The front door opened wider, revealing a slender woman in an expensive dress. Her pretty face was marred by a barely concealed bruise on her cheek, poorly hidden beneath face powder. Owen's gaze moved to the bruise, then back to Blackwell, his expression hardening. Some things never change, do they? Jessie chose that moment to intervene, hurrying the last few yards to the porch. Owen, all 3 figures turned toward her, Owen with surprise, Blackwell with confusion, and the woman with a mixture of fear and embarrassment. Jessie? Owen's voice held disbelief. What are you doing here? Sheriff Donovan told me everything, she said breathlessly, mounting the steps to stand beside him. About Mary, about what he did to her. Blackwell's expression darkened. This is a private matter. You have no business here, young woman. I have every business here, Jessie retorted, meeting his gaze squarely. Because I care what happens to Owen Tanner, and I won't stand by while he destroys his life seeking revenge even against a man who deserves it. She turned to Owen, placing a hand on his arm, the one hovering near his gun. This isn't the way, she said softly. You know it isn't. Mary wouldn't want you to become a killer. Something in Owen's expression shifted at the mention of his sister's name. The cold fury in his eyes wavered, uncertainty taking its place. Blackwell's wife stepped forward tentatively. What's happening, Lawrence? Who are these people? No one, Blackwell snapped. Go back inside, Elizabeth. But Elizabeth didn't move, her gaze fixed on Owen. You said he hurt your sister. Like he hurts me, the question hung in the air, charged with implication. Blackwell's face contorted with rage. Shut your mouth, woman. Go inside now or you'll what? Owen interrupted, his voice deadly calm. Beat her like you beat Mary, in front of witnesses this time. Elizabeth's hand moved to her bruised cheek, her eyes filling with tears. It wasn't the first time, she whispered. He said if I told anyone, he'd kill me, said no one would believe me anyway. I believe you, Jessie said firmly, moving to stand beside the frightened woman. And so will Sheriff Donovan. Blackwell's composure shattered completely. With a roar of rage, he lunged toward his wife, hand raised to strike. Owen moved with lightning speed, intercepting him and delivering a powerful blow to Blackwell's jaw that sent him sprawling across the porch. Don't touch her, Owen growled, standing protectively between Blackwell and the women. Blackwell scrambled to his feet, blood trickling from his split lip. His hand moved toward his coat pocket, and Jessie saw the glint of metal, a small pistol concealed there. Owen, he's armed, she cried. Owen drew his own weapon in one fluid motion, but he didn't fire. Instead, he stood his ground as Blackwell pointed the small pistol with a shaking hand. Put it down, Blackwell, Owen said evenly. You don't want to add murder to your crimes. My crimes. Blackwell's laugh was brittle, verging on hysteria. I've committed no crimes. I am Lawrence Blackwell, superintendent of the Silver Crown Mine. I am respected, admired. You're a coward who beats women, Owen replied, his voice steady despite the gun aimed at his chest. First my sister, now your wife. It ends today. For a tense moment, Jessie thought Blackwell might actually pull the trigger. His finger twitched on the trigger, his face contorted with hatred. But then the sound of approaching horses drew everyone's attention to the road, where Sheriff Donovan and 2 deputies were galloping toward the house. The distraction was all Owen needed. He lunged forward, knocking the pistol from Blackwell's hand and driving him to the ground. This time, there was no restraint in Owen's attack. Years of pent-up grief and rage fueled each blow as he pummeled the man who had murdered his sister. Owen, stop. Jessie cried, rushing forward. You'll kill him. It was Sheriff Donovan who finally pulled Owen off Blackwell, the latter's face a bloody mess but still breathing. That's enough, Tanner, Donovan said firmly. He'll face justice now, real justice. Owen stood panting, his knuckles raw and bloodied as the deputies hauled Blackwell to his feet. The fight seemed to have drained out of him, leaving only exhaustion in its wake. He killed Mary, Owen said, his voice ragged with emotion. Beat her to death and walked away a free man. And he won't walk away this time, Donovan assured him, nodding toward Elizabeth. Not with a living witness to his abuse, not with the evidence you've gathered. Elizabeth stepped forward, trembling but resolute. I'll testify, she declared, about everything. The beatings, the threats. All of it? Blackwell, barely conscious, could only glare hatefully as the deputies dragged him toward their waiting horses. As the lawmen departed with their prisoner, Jessie turned to Owen. His face was a mask of controlled emotion, the veneer of calm he had maintained for so long finally cracking to reveal the pain beneath. You followed me, he said quietly. Why? Jessie took his bloodied hand in hers, heedless of the stains it left on her borrowed dress. "Because you stayed with me when everyone else left," she replied simply. "Because you didn't leave me alone when I was vulnerable. How could I do any less for you?" Something in Owen's expression softened, the hard lines of anger giving way to a different emotion entirely. "I could have killed him, Jessie, I wanted to." "But you didn't," she reminded him. "You chose justice over vengeance. Mary would be proud." At the mention of his sister's name, Owen's composure finally broke completely. He bowed his head, shoulders shaking with silent sobs that had been held back for 8 long years. Jessie stepped forward without hesitation, wrapping her arms around him as he had once held her when she was at her weakest. "It's over," she whispered against his chest. "It's finally over." They stood like that for what seemed an eternity, Owen gradually regaining his composure in the circle of Jessie's embrace. When he finally raised his head, his eyes were clear for perhaps the first time since Mary's death. The burden of his unfinished business finally lifted. "Thank you," he said simply, "for stopping me from becoming something I would have regretted." Jessie smiled up at him. "Someone once told me I was stronger than I thought. Perhaps the same is true of you." The sound of a throat clearing reminded them that they weren't alone. Elizabeth Blackwell stood watching them, her expression a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "I don't know what happens now," she admitted. "Without Lawrence, You're welcome to stay with us," Jessie offered immediately. "My aunt and uncle would be happy to help until you decide what to do next." Elizabeth's relief was palpable. "Thank you. I don't know how I can ever repay either of you." "By living well," Owen said quietly. "That's the best tribute to those who have suffered at his hands." As they made their way back down the hill toward town Elizabeth to collect some belongings, Owen and Jessie to explain the situation to James and Martha, Jessie felt a subtle shift in their relationship. The barriers Owen had maintained, the distance he had tried to keep, seemed to have fallen away in the wake of his confrontation with Blackwell. When they reached the mercantile, James and Martha were predictably shocked by the day's events but immediately opened their home to Elizabeth. Martha bustled about preparing an extra room, while James closed the store early, declaring that family matters took precedence over business. That evening, after Elizabeth had been settled in her room and the events fully explained to the Winters, Owen and Jessie found themselves alone on the small balcony outside the family's living quarters. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting McGill in hues of gold and crimson. "What will you do now?" Jessie asked, voicing the question that had been on her mind since the confrontation with Blackwell. "Now that your business here is finished." Owen leaned against the railing, his profile illuminated by the fading light. "I haven't thought that far ahead," he admitted. "For so long, finding Blackwell was all that drove me. Now, you could stay," Jessie suggested, her heart beating faster at her own boldness. "McGill seems to be growing. A man with your skills could find opportunity here." Owen turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "And why would you want me to stay, Jessie Winters?" The directness of his question took her breath away. For a moment, she considered deflecting, offering practical reasons that had nothing to do with the feelings growing in her heart. But Owen Tanner deserved honesty, especially after everything they had shared. "Because when I think of you riding away, it feels like losing something precious before I've even had the chance to understand what it might become," she confessed. "Because in the short time I've known you, I've come to admire and respect the man you are. And because I think there might be something between us worth exploring if you're willing." Owen's expression softened, a vulnerability in his eyes that Jessie had glimpsed only in his most unguarded moments. "I'm not an easy man, Jessie. I've lived with anger and grief for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to live without it." "Then perhaps it's time to learn," she replied gently. "You don't have to do it alone." He reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek as if seeking permission. When she leaned into his touch, his calloused palm cupped her face with surprising tenderness. "I stayed with you because it was the right thing to do," Owen said softly. "But I think even then, some part of me recognized something special in you, something that reminded me there could be more to life than vengeance. And now," Jessie whispered, her heart in her throat. Now, Owen replied, his voice deepening, I find myself wanting to stay for entirely different reasons. The kiss that followed was gentle, tentative, a question rather than a declaration. Jessie answered by stepping closer, her hands coming to rest on his chest as she returned the kiss with all the emotion she had been holding back. When they finally parted, Owen's smile held a lightness she had never seen before. I think I'd like to get to know McGill better, he said. And you, Jessie Winters, if you'll allow it. I'd like that very much, she replied, her heart soaring with possibilities. As they stood together on the balcony, watching the first stars appear in the twilight sky, Jessie thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought them together. A fever, an abandoned campsite, a cowboy who chose to stay when others left. Somehow, amidst the vastness of the Montana territory, they had found each other. And now, as Owen's arm circled her waist and she leaned into his embrace, Jessie knew with certainty that neither of them would face the future alone. The months that followed brought changes to McGill and to the lives of those within it. Lawrence Blackwell was returned to Wyoming Territory to face trial for Mary Tanner's murder, this time with evidence too substantial to be dismissed, and a witness, his own wife, whose testimony could not be ignored. The justice that had eluded Owen for 8 years was finally served when Blackwell was sentenced to life in the territorial prison. Elizabeth, freed from her abusive marriage, discovered a talent for bookkeeping and eventually took over managing the accounts for James's mercantile. The quiet strength that had allowed her to survive Blackwell blossomed in an environment of support and respect, and she became an integral part of the extended Winters family. Owen didn't leave McGill as he once might have. Instead, he put his knowledge of horses and cattle to use, establishing a modest horse trading business that quickly gained a reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. His experience as a scout made him valuable to the community in other ways as well, guiding survey parties for the expanding mine operations, helping to map new trails to neighboring settlements, even occasionally assisting Sheriff Donovan when his tracking skills were needed. As for Jessie, she flourished in her new home. The skills she had developed as a seamstress in St. Louis proved valuable in McGill, where ready-made clothing was scarce and expensive. She began taking orders for custom garments, eventually expanding to a small dressmaking business operated from a corner of her uncle's store. Through it all, the bond between Owen and Jessie deepened and strengthened. They courted properly, under the approving eyes of James and Martha, who had recognized from the beginning what might grow between the quiet cowboy and the determined young woman he had rescued. Their courtship was unconventional by Eastern standards, riding together to deliver goods to outlying ranches, Owen teaching Jessie to shoot a revolver, just in case, shared picnics in the foothills where Owen would carve small wooden animals while Jessie read aloud from her favorite books. They discovered common ground in their love of the land, their appreciation for self-reliance, and their shared understanding of loss and resilience. By the following spring, when the mountains were carpeted in wildflowers and the air was sweet with new beginnings, Owen proposed. It happened during one of their rides into the hills, at a spot overlooking the valley where McGill nestled like a jewel among the rugged terrain. I never thought I'd find peace again after Mary died, Owen confessed, taking Jessie's hands in his. I thought vengeance was all I had left. But then I found you, or rather you found me, sleeping by your side when everyone else had gone. Jessie smiled at the memory, though it had been frightening at the time. You stayed when no one else would. And now I want to stay forever, Owen continued, his voice deepening with emotion. If you'll have me, Jessie Winters, I'd like to build a life with you. Not just because of how we met or what we've been through together, but because of who you are, brave and kind and stronger than anyone I've ever known. From his pocket, he produced a simple gold band set with a small but perfect sapphire. It was my mother's, he explained, the only thing I kept when I sold everything else to fund my search for Blackwell. Tears welled in Jessie's eyes as she extended her hand, allowing him to slip the ring onto her finger. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Owen Tanner, I will marry you." They were wed in McGill's small church 3 weeks later, with James giving the bride away and Martha weeping joyfully in the front pew. Sheriff Donovan stood as Owen's best man, and Elizabeth served as Jessie's maid of honor. The entire town turned out for the celebration afterward, for both bride and groom had become beloved figures in the community, she for her kindness and skill with a needle, he for his quiet strength and unfailing integrity. Owen had purchased a small parcel of land just outside town, with enough acreage for his growing horse trading business, and a comfortable cabin he had built with his own hands. It was to this home that he brought Jessie after the wedding, carrying her over the threshold in the traditional manner despite her laughing protests that she was perfectly capable of walking. "Humor me," he said with a smile that still made her heart skip a beat. "I've been waiting my whole life to bring the right woman home." Their life together was not without challenges. The frontier demanded resilience from all who chose to make their lives there. Harsh winters, dry summers, the boom and bust cycles of a mining economy all tested their resolve in different ways. But they faced each challenge together, drawing strength from their shared commitment and the love that had grown from such unlikely beginnings. 2 years after their wedding, Jessie gave birth to their first child, a son they named James, after her uncle who had provided the opportunity that brought her west. A daughter, Mary, followed 18 months later, her name a tribute to the aunt she would never meet but whose story she would one day know. On the night of Mary's birth, as Jessie rested with their newborn daughter cradled in her arms, Owen sat beside the bed, his expression one of wonder and profound gratitude. "I keep thinking about that morning," he said softly, "when you woke to find everyone gone except me. How different our lives might have been if I had ridden on with the wagon train." Jessie reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. "Perhaps it was fate," she suggested. "Or perhaps it was simply that you were a good man who couldn't leave someone in need." Owen lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Either way, it was the best decision I ever made." As their children grew, so too did McGill, evolving from a rough mining settlement into a proper town with a schoolhouse, a bank, and even a small opera house where traveling shows occasionally performed. The Tanner family prospered alongside the community, Owen's horse trading business expanding to include breeding stock imported from Kentucky, while Jessie's dressmaking enterprise grew to employ 3 young women from town. They purchased the big house on the hill, the one that had once belonged to Lawrence Blackwell, when it came up for sale after the mine changed ownership. It seemed fitting somehow, a final closing of the circle, to fill those rooms with love and laughter after they had witnessed so much pain. And on summer evenings, when the work was done and the children were abed, Owen and Jessie would sit on the wide porch, watching the stars appear over McGill just as they had that night on the balcony above the mercantile. Sometimes they spoke of the past, of the strange and winding path that had brought them together. More often, they planned for the future for their children, for the community they had come to love, for the years they would share. "I never imagined this life," Owen confessed one such evening, his arm around Jessie's shoulders as they watched a meteor streak across the darkening sky. "After Mary died, I couldn't see beyond the next day, the next mile of Blackwell's trail, but you changed that, Jessie. You showed me there was still beauty in the world, still reason to hope." Jessie leaned into his embrace, thinking of the frightened young woman who had awakened alone in the wilderness, and the man who had chosen to stay by her side. "We saved each other," she said simply, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw, no longer tense with unresolved grief, but relaxed in the contentment of a life well lived. "And that's a rare gift indeed." As the stars multiplied overhead and the lights of McGill twinkled below them like earthbound constellations, Owen bent to kiss his wife, a gesture that, even after years of marriage, still held the wonder of that first kiss on the balcony. In that moment, as in countless others before and yet to come, both were profoundly grateful for the twist of fate that had left her sleeping when the caravan broke camp, and the choice that had led him to wake her gently and stay by her side.